stay there, that's cool too. But I'm kind of big on walking. But anyway, so my name is Dan Harty. I am with the Wichita Police Department. I am right now a sergeant in the detective section, so I supervise a group of detectives who are homicide detectives. I've been with the police department 25 years, and I've been a supervisor for the last 5, and 4 of those have been a supervisor in the homicide section. In Wichita, like at this point, we have, I believe it's 16 homicides so far this year, but on an average, we probably average close to 40 or so, would be my guess. Sometimes though, we work a case and ultimately the victim lives, and that's great. But we do have another section that typically does those. But if we think someone's in danger of dying, then I'll get our homicide detectives involved. But what I'm going to go through today is just a little bit about what we do and just some things to think about if you were responding to a crime scene and what actually goes on with those investigations. If you have any questions, I'll definitely take them at the end. But if you have something that comes up right then, let me know. Just so you know, we have 8 of us. We typically work Monday through Friday, but we get called out after hours because these homicides don't just happen during the day. So you have to be on call quite a bit. Obviously, we work murder cases, but we also respond sometimes to suicides if they're suspicious deaths to make sure it's not a homicide. We also work missing person cases. These are attempt to locates. So if someone's reported missing, we will assign that to a detective and have them keep looking for them until they are found. Honestly, the majority of those people we do find alive, they're just either having some mental health issues or choosing to be gone from their friends or family. We work kidnappings and also officer-involved shootings. We work those in conjunction with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. So basically, a criminal investigation, that's why we're here, what we're here to talk about. We were trying to discover and get acquisition of analysis of evidence to determine if there's a violation of the law, and then ultimately try to track down who's responsible for that. Because we do have unsolved cases, but an unsolved murder causes a lot of stress for the family. It puts stress on our detectives. We're trying to do the best we can to get answers for the family members so they can ultimately, it's never going to bring someone back, but ultimately maybe we can hold the person accountable who does it. Different things with crime scenes. The main thing everyone thinks about is the primary scene. That would be like if we go to a house and someone's been found deceased inside as a result of a murder. And so that's easy to think about, but also we like to consider secondary scenes, and those would be where vehicles, could be a vehicle, maybe the vehicle is used to transport either a suspect away from the scene, or maybe there's evidence inside of it. We might have another scene at the suspect's house. Once we arrest them, we'd like to do a search warrant at their house and look for evidence of the crime inside. And that evidence could be a weapon, it could even be clothing. When you fire a gun, a lot of times it discharges some particles into your clothing. We would like to get that so we can send it to the lab for testing. Those are what we would call secondary scenes. And sometimes we have scenes that are very complex, especially when maybe someone came and did a shooting at a house, and then they ran on foot, and maybe they continued shooting at other people. We might have a scene that encompasses several blocks of the street, or several blocks in a neighborhood, I should say. And when that happens, it takes a lot of resources to hold those scenes, but ultimately we just want to, when I say hold it, we need to keep the public out of it, and then our crime scene investigators can come in and do their work, which is the documentation. And I'll talk about that here in a second. So when we have a crime scene, basically what we're going to do is this. And then for an example, if we get called to a house where someone has been shot, or maybe they're just dead inside, there's some blood, we don't know if they've been shot or stabbed or what. Maybe a neighbor comes over to check on them, finds the door's been kicked open, and they're dead inside. They will call 911. We will have officers respond to the scene. Those police officers, their job is to get there and do 2 things. One, to check for any victims, or to see if we can help the victim that we know about. So they're going to get there, they're going to go inside, and they may determine, hey, this person is still alive. They will then make sure the rest of the house is safe. And what I mean by that is they will go through the remainder of the house and make sure there's not a suspect still on scene with a weapon or something like that. And once the house is deemed safe, then we can call and have EMS come in. And then EMS will come in and they'll treat the victim. If they think there's enough they can do, they'll try to stabilize them and get them transported to the hospital. So I'm gonna grab some more. So that's what our officers will do. Now, unfortunately, when officers go in the scene like that, they sometimes walk through evidence and move evidence. We've had, if there's a lot of shell casings from a shooting scene, sometimes they kick them over. Sometimes we've had a shell casing get stuck in an officer's boot. We've had officers walk through blood. We've had EMS technicians walk through blood. And so it kind of messes up the crime scene a little bit, but that's just kind of the cost of doing business. And that's something we have to deal with as the investigators. So once the scene is secure, then the next thing we will do is we will have our crime scene investigators come in. They will document the scene as it is at that moment. So they will go in and take pictures throughout the entire house. They start out, if you walk into this room, you take a picture from the doorway showing into the room, and then you go in and take different areas so you have everything photographed. We also have a Leica scanner, which is a piece of technology. It's basically a base that we move around. It's a 360 camera that goes around, sends out, light sources, lasers type things, takes measurements all over, and basically makes a digital image of the crime scene that we can later go back and view on a computer years down the line if we need to. It'll basically, we can do measurements if we need to, or we can look for any lost evidence or something we might have missed in the scene. But all that is done before detectives go in and do much work inside. Eventually, the crime scene investigators will move to evidence collection after they've drawn diagrams to document where everything is so it can be talked about in court down the line. Then we will have them actually, after they collect it, then we'll have detectives come in and look around and see if there's anything else we need to do as far as the crime scene investigation goes. One thing to think about, I should mention, is these cases happen. Like today, there might be a case that happens. It's not going to go to court more than likely for almost a year, sometimes 2 or 3 years. I once had a case that it took 6 years to get to court because the defendant was having mental health issues, and so he was never competent to stand trial until the very end. So 6 years is a long time, and so you need to remember what happened in the crime scene, and that's why we do such a thorough documentation where we can say this piece of evidence, maybe it's a bullet, was found at this exact location, 3 inches from the wall, 8 feet from this wall, and so they can recreate all that. So once that is all done, then I'll have detectives come in, we'll re-walk through the scene, make sure there's nothing that was missed or something else we need to do. I will note that it's not uncommon for us to be inside a house for maybe 8 to 10 hours doing work, and sometimes we had a quadruple murder back in 2000 before you guys were born. They were in the house for days on end because there was so much evidence to collect. A lot of times after we're done collecting evidence, we will keep an officer posted on the front door and back door so no one can go in there, and we'll let the autopsy take place, and we'll learn maybe the cause of death or how many bullets are in someone, because we may have to go back out to the house and look for additional evidence. And that would be, we try to account for every bullet that's been fired. Not always possible, but that's one thing we do. So we might go back out to the house and do that. To get into the house and do these scenes, there's a couple different ways that we can go to the house. If the homeowner will give us permission to process the crime scene, then we can come in, and we call that a waiver to search. It's where they're giving us permission. The more common one that we do is by using a search warrant. And so what I basically have to have someone do is I'll have a detective write this search warrant. They will do the first couple paragraphs, will describe how we got to the call, why we were there, what we found, that maybe we came to an address, 1421 North Spruce Street. At that location, we went inside and found a gentleman who had been stabbed in the chest. So that gives the judge a little bit of information on why we were there. And then in our next paragraph, we're going to ask for what evidence we can collect, and that is, we'll say we're looking for evidence of this crime to include a knife, cutting instrument, a knife sheath, things like that. We're also looking to recover the body from the scene, any other evidence, fingerprints, DNA swabs. Those are all things that we will ask for, and then the judge will sign the search warrant, and it gives us permission to go inside and do all that. And the other thing I talk about is exigent circumstances. I'll just throw out an example. That's when something has to happen very quickly. So a good example of that would be maybe you're at a restaurant down in Old Town and there's a shooting in there and there's a big crowd and the suspect drops the gun on the ground. If an officer gets there, they're going to pick it up right away to make sure it doesn't disappear and be lost, or someone else doesn't pick it up and use it and get someone hurt. So that would be an example of an exigent circumstance. So this is the big key, is what is evidence, and sometimes it's very obvious what you're looking for. I used the example in the last class. Maybe you have someone dead inside a house and they have a lot of trauma to their head, like they've been beaten up in the head. You could look across or throughout that house, and if you find maybe a baseball bat with blood and hair on it, it's pretty obvious that's what the murder weapon is. But sometimes you look through there and you don't find anything, and that's because maybe the suspect took it with them or someone else came in and moved it. So that's the type of physical evidence you're looking for, but there's other evidence that you've got to find, and some of it you can't see. That would include the fingerprints, the hairs and fibers and things like that. To do hairs, I never really knew how they did it until I got into police work. They basically have big pieces of tape that are big squares like this, and they just put it on the carpet and keep moving it over and pick up, and you pick it up. You could go home and do this tonight, put a piece of Scotch tape on your floor, pick it up and see what's on there. There's always going to be some hairs and things like that. So that's how that's collected. And if you're going to do a whole room this big like that, it would take a long time. So that's some evidence that you might look for. DNA swabs, when we have a bloody scene where there's blood on the wall, blood on the floor, we take sometimes hundreds of Q-tips and swab different areas, because our hope is, more than likely, most of that blood is going to belong to the suspect. But a lot of times if you stab someone and you're holding a knife and stab, your finger comes off the knife a little bit, off the sheath, or off the hilt, and goes down and you get a cut on there on your finger. And we found blood, sometimes just small amounts of blood mixed in with other amounts of blood, and that's how we solved and showed who the suspect is. So those are some things that you're looking for. But other types of what we consider evidence would be communicated evidence, and a lot of that is witness statements, suspect statements, maybe surviving victims. They'll tell us things that happened. I talked in the last group, cell phones are huge because cell phones have so much data in them. They'll keep track of your location. If you have your Google location on, if we get your phone later, we can get a search warrant from a judge that will allow us to go back, and they can see where you've possibly been. Now, it doesn't always work that way. If you've turned off your data location or your data services and location services, we may not be able to do that. Give another example. Now we're seeing where smartphones, due to some hardware that they have in there, if you go into a house and there's a smart TV, it'll try to communicate, and it'll show a log in your phone that this TV or this Wi-Fi in this house tried to connect to your phone. And so then that can help place someone at a scene. Maybe the suspect denies that they've ever been to that house. Well, if I can search their phone, I can prove otherwise. So video is huge too. I talked about almost every case we have some sort of video that's involved. It may not capture the exact crime scene because maybe that's in a house or it's in the backyard, but someone down the street has a video camera that will show a car leaving the scene or someone leaving on foot. Another thing we have a lot of is cameras at intersections that record license plates. We have, I think it's 96 of those throughout the city, and it's a good way to track vehicles, especially late at night when there's not as much traffic. You may know a general description of a black truck was seen leaving the area, but we can pull up cameras in a certain radius and see if we ever find a black truck going through that intersection. And then it reads the license plate, and that kind of gives us a good start quite often. Another thing detectives do on cases is we do a lot of interviews. And when I describe an interview, I'm just basically talking to someone trying to get information, just like you would do with your friend. If you found out your friend's car got stolen, you're going to ask them some questions. Well, where were you at? What'd you see? That's the same thing we're doing. We're just trying to get information. Some witnesses are hesitant to talk to us because of many reasons. Maybe they don't want to tell on their friend. They don't want to be a snitch in general. That's the code of the street, is don't snitch. We have, we may do backgrounds just to establish alibis, talk to people like that. So a lot of interviews. But then the next thing we have is an interrogation, and an interrogation takes place after you develop a suspect in a crime and you are basically accusing that person in a sit-down, face-to-face conversation, where I'm gonna lay out the evidence that I have and trying to get that suspect to make an admission of either being there or ultimately a full confession of, yes, I was there and I did stab this person for whatever reason. So that's what an interrogation would entail. Ultimately, when we're doing an investigation, this is a huge part. We are trying to link all of this together. We're trying to tie the victim to the crime scene, which is quite often very easy because the victim is still there. But then you're trying to connect the suspect to the victim and the suspect also to the crime scene. And you can do that through physical evidence like the fingerprints, the DNA, but you can also do that with video and cell phone data and things like that. You can make all those connections. When we're working death cases, ultimately this kind of comes into the line of what the coroner's office does, but they classify these deaths, and it's called manner of death, and they will determine on a death certificate how the death is classified. Natural, think of old age or cancer or heart attack. Accidental, that could be a car wreck, you fall off the roof at your house when you're working on some roofing. Drug overdose would also be accidental. Suicide, that's kind of obvious. That's an intentionally taking your own life. Homicide is where my investigators fall in, and that's where it's basically the death at the hands of another by either some action, whether it's a weapon or hands, or you could even drug someone to death, so that would be a homicide. And undetermined, that's when, based on all physical examination, they've looked at the heart, all of the different organs, they don't see a cause of death, they've done toxicology tests, they don't find any drugs in the system, but yet some reason this person died, it would be considered undetermined. We see that more with small infants when they die at home because, and a lot of times that gets attributed to like maybe SIDS, is what they call that. So when we have a call, basically what I want to do is, because I'm obviously not there all the time, I may be at home sleeping, I'm going to get a call from dispatch that they'll let me know that there's been a murder. I will call the supervisor on scene, ask them for all the details of the case, ask how many witnesses are on scene. Sometimes it may just be a body dumped in a street. Other times it's down in Old Town and there's 100 witnesses. So they'll tell me that, and I'll determine then how many detectives I need to respond to the scene. We like to get witnesses who are really part of the crime or who see good things to come downtown and talk to us. That way we can do it in a controlled environment. So I will ask how many people are willing to come down or good witnesses, and I'll send detectives to the city building to do that. I mentioned earlier there's only 8 homicide detectives, so we don't do it all by ourselves. We get detectives from the robbery section, from the gang unit, from sex crimes, and they all help us out. I'll always have someone do a background on the person who's been deceased. When I say background, look at other police cases they made. Have they ever reported being threatened or anything like that? Maybe they have a husband who has been abusive in the past. That might be something we look at. You might look at, who has access to the house. Maybe it's like in your clutter case, you've got a guy who used to hire a lot of people to come to his property and do work at the farm. You might look at who all has been out there, and you would try to get a list of all those employees and go out and contact them and get alibis and see what they were doing at the time of the crime. I mentioned we do send people to the hospital. We try to get dying declarations or maybe just talk to the doctors. Hey, before this person died, did they say anything? So we'll send either an officer or a detective out there to do that. Got all these people to help us on these crimes. We have specialized officers. Maybe the gang unit will call them in if we're looking for a witness or a suspect. They'll go out and look for them because they know where people hang out a lot. We talked about the crime scenes. Ultimately, I have each case is assigned to one detective, and it's their responsibility to piece all of this together. When it comes time for court, they prepare the affidavit, which is basically a summary of the case. They present it to the district attorney. They decide what charges are to be filed, and then when it comes time for court, they bring all the evidence over for the court proceedings. They determine which evidence needs to be tested at labs. That's kind of the job of the case detective. Talked about that. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of reports to be done after the fact. Other things, let's see. Just to let you know, you don't just start out as a homicide detective. You can't just come apply at the police department and say, I'd like to be a homicide detective. You have to start out in patrol, do your minimum of 2 years answering calls, but it's good for you because you learn how to talk to people, you learn the basics of investigation, and then after that you can test for detective, and then when there's openings in the homicide section, you can apply for those, and it's like anything else. We do an interview process and look at people's background, how they've worked and stuff. So that's kind of the basic overview, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have about the police department, about murders, about anything. Nobody.
I have one.
Okay.
How, I guess it's the degree of difficulty when you are investigating a homicide in town as opposed to somewhere rural.
Yeah, that's a good question because now most of our homicide cases are, we're with the city of Wichita, but there are some isolated parts of the city where, maybe down by the river, we've had homeless people killed down there. And so I would maybe say that's similar, but the main difference is it just becomes more difficult because in the city you have a greater potential for more witnesses, you have more cameras, and that's the main thing I would say. But when you have a body dump out in a field and the county has to work that, their hands are tied. It's very difficult. Like I said, almost every case here in the city, someone on the block has a camera, and that may be because there's 20 houses on the block and one person has a camera. When you're out in the country and there's one person who lives and it's way down the road until there's another person, they may not have cameras. So yeah, definitely we have it easier in the city, I would say.
So if something would happen out here, like in our parking lot, would that be WPD or would that be the sheriff?
It would be. This is Wichita Police property. Yeah, and if something happened in the parking lot, we would respond. Of course, we would try to interview any witnesses that we could. But you also have a lot of video at the school.
Mm-hmm.
I would assign a detective to comb over that video and make good detailed notes of it all, and ultimately that video would end up being played in court. That's great evidence. The thing about videos though, it doesn't show necessarily everything, and what I mean by that is it doesn't maybe show what's going on. Like you may have a good self-defense claim that doesn't come across in the video so much, but the person, we arrest them, they come up and they convey, this person said they were gonna grab my gun from me, and they made some lunges at him. It depends what angles we have on the cameras, but videos do help tremendously, but sometimes they don't tell the full picture. I just want to point that out. So, anything else?
One question. That's a good question.
If we were fully staffed, which we're not right now, the police department has 680 officers, and they work 4 shifts. We have the north, south, east, and west station. We also have a downtown bureau where specialty units are housed. Trying to think what else.